You're the charge nurse. Let the people with training handle this.
His rhythm's been unstable for 6 minutes.
I don't recall asking for your assessment.
Then don't. Watch the monitor with me.
Get him to the OR, now!
He won't make the elevator on this rhythm.
Step aside. That's not a request.
Sir, I've held rooms louder than this one.
Move him. That's my call.
Do what she says. All of it. That's Selene Cross.
The monitor went flat at 2 in the morning, and the room did what rooms do. It filled with people who knew exactly what to do, and none of it was working. Chest compressions, epinephrine pushed, a resident calling the rhythm that wasn't a rhythm. And in the doorway stood the night charge nurse, the one they called quiet, the one nobody looked at twice, watching a young man's life run out through a wound they couldn't reach. "Call it," someone said. "We've lost him." She stepped forward. She rolled her sleeves past the elbow, and when she spoke, her voice was so level it stopped the room cold. "Get me a thoracotomy tray, now." Her hands did not shake. That was the first thing anyone would remember. Her hands did not shake. Her name was Selene Cross, and for 3 years, she had been the least remarkable person on the night shift at one of Chicago's busiest trauma centers. That was how she wanted it. She came in before the others, left after them, and in between she moved through the unit like water finding its level. Never hurried, never loud, always exactly where the trouble was about to be before the trouble knew it. The younger nurses liked her because she never made them feel small. The older ones respected her because she never made a mistake they could point to. And the doctors, the ones who noticed her at all, filed her under a single quiet word: reliable. She restocked the crash carts. She caught the medication errors before they left the pharmacy. She held the hands of the dying when their families couldn't get there in time, and she never once told anyone what it cost her. They knew almost nothing about her. They knew she'd moved to the city from somewhere out west. They knew she lived alone, that she didn't drink at the shift parties, that she wore her hair pulled back so tight it looked like discipline. They knew she'd been in the service, because it said so on her badge in letters most people never bothered to read. What they did not know was the arithmetic she carried. Too many of them, she used to think, standing in a tent with the canvas snapping in a wind full of grit. Too many of them, and only one of me. She had learned to work faster than fear. She had learned to hold a man's heart together with her hands while the world outside tried to end. And she had learned, when she finally came home, that there was no place in a polished American hospital for a woman who had done what she'd done in a place she was told never to name. So she folded it away. She took the night shift, where the light was low and the questions were few. She let them call her the quiet one. She told herself she was done with the other thing, the thing that lived in her hands. She told herself she could just be a nurse now, and that being a nurse was enough. She almost believed it. The trouble with a trauma center is that the past does not ask your permission before it walks back through the door. It came on a Tuesday in the dead of winter, the kind of Chicago night where the wind off the lake found every gap in a coat and the ambulance bay doors froze half open. Selene had been on since 7 the evening before. She was counting narcotics with a new nurse named Priya, patient and unbothered, when the radio in the charge station crackled. Trauma 1, inbound, 4 minutes, gunshot wound to the chest, 26-year-old male, sats dropping, they're bagging him. She set down the count sheet. She did not run. She walked, and the walking was worse to see than running, because it was the walk of someone who had done this 10,000 times and had stopped being surprised by any of it. The doors banged open, and the cold came in with the gurney, and the paramedics were talking fast, the way they do when they're losing someone and don't want to say so. Young man, broad through the shoulders. There was a tattoo on his forearm, an emblem she recognized before her mind caught up to her eyes. A regiment, a brotherhood, a life spent downrange. A ranger, somebody's son who had survived 3 tours in places with no good names and come home to be shot on a Chicago street corner over nothing at all. His name's Kane, one of the medics said. Sergeant, we got that much off him before he went under. They moved him into the trauma bay and the team swarmed, and for a moment Selene stood back because that was her role now. She handed things. She anticipated. She was the steady current under the surface, while the doctors made the waves. The resident on duty was good but green. He got a line in. He called for blood. He listened to a chest that was filling with what it should not be filling with, and his face began to do the thing that young doctors' faces do when the training runs out ahead of the experience. And then the chief of surgery came through the doors. Dr. Raymond Vance did not walk into a room. He arrived in it. He was 51 years old, and he had built a reputation the way some men build monuments, one impressive stone at a time, each one visible from the highway. He was, by every metric the hospital cared about, brilliant. He was also a man who had spent so long being the smartest person in every room that he had forgotten the rooms could contain anyone but him. "What have we got?" he said, and it wasn't a question, it was a claiming. The resident rattled off the numbers. Vance pulled on gloves. He glanced once at the monitor, once at the young man's gray face, and his mouth thinned. "Blood pressure? We can't get one. He's bleeding out into his chest," Vance said. "Get him to the OR, if there's an OR to get him to." That was the moment. Selene felt it come, the way you feel the floor tilt on a ship. She had been watching the monitor. She had been watching the chest tube, and she knew, the way you know your own name, that this young man did not have the minutes it would take to move him upstairs. His heart was going to stop before the elevator doors closed. And when it stopped, up there, behind sterile doors and scheduling, and the slow ballet of a proper operating theater, it would be too late, and everyone would say they'd done everything they could. She did the math she'd sworn she'd never do again. "He won't make the OR," she said. The room turned. Vance turned. He looked at her the way a man looks at a chair that has spoken. "I'm sorry?" "He's losing more than we're giving him," Selene said, and her voice was quiet, but it carried, because quiet things carry in loud rooms. "His pressure's gone. He's about to arrest. If we move him now, he arrests in the hallway and we lose the window. He needs his chest opened here. He needs the bleeding controlled now, not in 10 minutes. There was a silence in the trauma bay that had a texture to it. The younger nurses looked at their shoes. The resident looked at Vance. And Vance looked at the badge on Selene's chest, at the 2 letters after her name that he had never once bothered to read, and he smiled the way a man smiles right before he says something he thinks is funny. "And you are?" "Charge nurse," she said. "The charge nurse." He let the words sit there like something spoiled. "I'll tell you what. When I need someone to tell me my emergency department is out of gauze, you'll be the first person I call. Until then, I'll manage the patient, get him moving." And then the monitor flatlined. The tone filled the room, that long, terrible single note that means the argument is over and the body has cast the deciding vote. The resident's hands came down on the young man's chest. Compressions started. Someone pushed epinephrine, and it did nothing, because you cannot squeeze a heart back to life through a broken chest when the tank the heart is pumping from is empty and the wound is somewhere you can't see. They coded him. They coded him hard, by the book, for what felt like an hour and was closer to 4 minutes, and the number on the clock climbed and the young man's color went from gray to something worse. And Selene stood there and watched a ranger who had walked out of the worst places on earth slip away on a table in his own country because the man in charge would rather be right than be humble. "Call it," Vance said. "We've lost him. Time of—" No. She hadn't planned to say it. It came up out of the same place her hands came from, the place she'd folded away and thought she'd locked. She stepped forward and she rolled her sleeves past her elbows, and there was a scar on her left forearm that the sharp-eyed among them would later swear they'd never noticed before, and she said the words that broke her cover forever. "Get me a thoracotomy tray, now." Vance actually laughed. It was a short, disbelieving sound. "Absolutely not, nurse. Step away from the patient. He is 30 seconds from being gone for good," Selene said. "And I am the only person in this room who has done a resuscitative thoracotomy more than once. If you have a better plan, use it right now. If you don't, get out of my way." For 1 heartbeat, 2, nobody moved. And then a voice came from the doorway, from a nurse who had come running from the next bay when she heard the code called, a broad-shouldered woman with gray coming into her hair and a stillness in her that matched Celine's own. Her name was Ortiz. She had been a combat medic once, in her own younger years, in her own war, and when she saw Selene standing there with her sleeves rolled up and that particular flatness in her eyes, something moved across her face that was almost like seeing a ghost. "Do what she says," Ortiz said. Her voice shook, not with fear, but with something closer to awe. "Everybody, do exactly what she says. I've heard about her. I didn't know it was her." She looked at Vance, and there was 30 years of the front line in the look. "That's Selene Cross. If she says open the chest, you open the chest." There are moments in a life where everything you built comes down and everything you buried comes up, and there is no going back to the person you were an hour before. Selene had one of those moments with her hand already reaching for the tray. The thing about training that goes bone deep is that it does not care whether you're ready. It simply arrives when it's called. Her hands moved and her voice went low and even, and she began to narrate what she was doing, the way she'd been taught to narrate, in a place where the person beside you might be gone in the next minute, and someone had to be able to finish what you started. "Betadine, fast, don't be neat about it, scalpel. I'm going in below the nipple line, 5th intercostal space, left side. Ortiz, I need you on suction. Somebody keep bagging him, don't you dare stop." The blade opened the chest wall in a single confident line, and there was a release then, as the pressure that had been drowning his heart came free, and even the doctors who had opened 1,000 bellies went pale, because this was not their world. This was the other world, the field world, the world where you did the unthinkable thing because the thinkable thing had already failed. Rib spreader, she cranked it and the chest opened. A sound nobody in that room would forget, a sound that lived in the teeth. And then Selene Cross reached into a dying man's chest and closed her fingers around his heart. It was not beating, it sat in her palm, slack and still, a fist that had forgotten how to be a fist. And she began, gently, rhythmically, to squeeze it, the way you'd coax a frightened thing, the way you'd remind a body of something it used to know. Internal cardiac massage. 1 and 2 and 3, the heart filling and emptying under her fingers, doing by hand the work it had quit doing on its own. "There's the bleeder," she said. "Aorta's intact, thank God. But he's got a tear. Ortiz, more suction. I can't see. There, I see it." Her other hand slid down along the great vessel, found the thick cord of the descending aorta, and she did the thing that buys a body time when it has none left to spend. She got control of the aorta above the injury, pinching off the flood so that what little he had left would go where it was needed, to the heart she was squeezing and the brain that was starving above it. "Cross clamp," she said, and Ortiz slapped it into her hand like they'd worked together for 20 years. Selene set the clamp, and the loss into the chest slowed to a trickle, and for the first time since the doors banged open, the young man on the table stopped losing. "Blood," she said, "all of it, everything you've got, fast, on a pressure bag, and keep it coming." The heart in her hand gave a flutter. She felt it before the monitor showed it, the smallest twitch against her palm, a muscle remembering its whole reason for existing. She kept squeezing, patient, unhurried, coaxing, and the flutter became a tremble, and the tremble found a rhythm, ragged at first and then stronger, until the heart of Sergeant Kane began to beat again, on its own, inside the open cage of his ribs, against the fingers of a woman the hospital had labeled reliable. The monitor caught up, a rhythm, a real one, a pressure, low but there, climbing with every unit of blood they poured in. "There you are," Selene said, so softly that only the young man's stopped ears could have heard it, if they could have heard anything at all. "There you are, Sergeant. I've got you. Somebody's got you." The trauma bay had gone utterly silent, that stunned kind of quiet that comes after something impossible has just occurred in front of people who make their living not being surprised. The resident was staring at Selene's hands. Priya, the new nurse, had tears standing in her eyes and did not know she was crying. And Dr. Raymond Vance stood against the wall where he had somehow ended up, gloves still on, having done nothing, watching the charge nurse he had dismissed hold a living heart in her hand. "Now," Selene said, and only now did she look up, and only now did her voice have an edge in it. "He needs a cardiothoracic surgeon and an OR and about 12 people better rested than me. I've bought him maybe 40 minutes with this clamp and not 1 second more. So somebody call upstairs, and this time we move him." She glanced at Vance, and there was nothing cruel in it, which was somehow worse than cruelty. "Doctor, he's your patient. Take him. I want to stop here for just a breath, because these are the stories I love most to tell. The ones where the person the world walked past turns out to be the one who holds the line." If stories like this one mean something to you, take a moment to subscribe. It helps more than you'd think, and it costs you nothing but a heartbeat. Now, back to that trauma bay, and to a heart that was beating again, and to a man who had a great deal of thinking to do. They took Sergeant Kane up to the operating room with Selene's clamp still holding his aorta, and Selene walking beside the gurney the whole way, because you do not hand off a patient like that from the doorway. You walk him in. You give the report yourself. The cardiothoracic surgeon who met them was a woman named Dr. Feld, older, unflappable, and when Selene told her in 6 flat sentences exactly what she'd done and where the injury was and what she'd found, Dr. Feld looked at her for a long moment and said only, "Field surgeon?" "Once," Selene said. "It shows." Feld pulled her mask up. "Good work. I'll take it from here. Go sit down before you fall down." Selene did not fall down, but out in the scrub hallway, with the doors closing on the young man she'd opened, she leaned her back against the cold tile and let herself shake for exactly 10 seconds, which was all she would allow, and then she straightened up and rolled her sleeves back down over the scar on her forearm and went back to work. There were still 11 other patients on her unit. There was still a narcotic count she hadn't finished with Priya. There was still, always, the next thing. But the hospital does not forget. Not a thing like that. By the time her shift ended at 7 in the morning, the story had already begun to move through the building, the way water moves through a cracked foundation, into every corner, up every floor. The night charge nurse had cracked a chest in the trauma bay, the quiet one, Cross. She'd had her hand inside a ranger's heart and brought him back from a called code, and the chief of surgery had told her to step away, and she'd told him no. Ortiz was the one who filled in the rest of it, in the break room, to anyone who would listen, and plenty would. Ortiz, who had been downrange herself, in her own younger war, and had heard the name Selene Cross the way you hear the name of a legend, half rumor, half prayer. There'd been a forward surgical team, Ortiz said, a small one, set up too close to the fighting because that was where the fighting kept the wounded. And there'd been a night, a bad night, a night that got worse, when the position took fire and half the team went down and the wounded kept coming and coming, and one surgeon stayed on her feet and kept operating while the walls of the tent shook, hour after hour, more of them than one person should ever be able to hold. Kept operating when the generator failed and they worked by flashlights held in the teeth of the walking wounded. Kept operating until the sun came up and the count of the living was higher than anyone had any right to expect. They gave her a medal for it, Ortiz said, and her voice did the thing again, the shaking that wasn't fear. She never wore it. Nobody I served with ever met her. She was a story, a thing you told the new medics so they'd believe it could be done. And she's been restocking our crash carts for 3 years and correcting my charting, and I never knew. I never knew it was her. Priya, the new nurse, said the thing that everyone was thinking. Why would she hide that? Why would anyone hide that? And Ortiz, who understood, said the truest thing anyone said all week. Because when you've held that many people together with your hands, honey, sometimes the only way to keep breathing is to put the hands away for a while and be nobody at all. Dr. Vance did not sleep that night. That was not like him. He was a man who slept the sleep of the certain, who had never in 30 years lost so much as an hour to doubt. But he lay awake in the dark of his lakefront condo, and he watched the ceiling and he saw, over and over, The moment the charge nurse rolled her sleeves up, and the moment he laughed, and the moment the monitor went flat while he stood there being right. He had built his whole life on a single terror he had never named, not even to himself. The terror of being ordinary. He had come from nothing, from a mill town and a father who called him soft, and he had climbed on the strength of being smarter and surer and faster to the answer than any man in the room. And somewhere along that climb, he had come to believe that the certainty was the thing that made him extraordinary. That if he were ever wrong, ever truly wrong in a way that mattered, in a way with a life on the other end of it, then the whole structure would come down and reveal the ordinary, frightened boy underneath. And tonight a nurse had shown him wrong in front of his entire department, and the terrible thing, the thing that kept him staring at the ceiling, was not that she had embarrassed him. It was that she had been right, and if she had listened to him, the young man would be gone. He got up before dawn. He drove to the hospital in the dark with the lake wind rocking the car, and he went up to the surgical ICU, and he stood outside the glass of a room where Sergeant Kane lay sedated and intubated, and, against every odd he'd have quoted an hour earlier, alive. The chest was closed now, sewn shut by Dr. Feld over the repair, and the machines breathed for him, and the numbers on the screen were the boring, beautiful numbers of a man who was going to make it. Vance stood there a long time. A nurse he didn't know charted quietly in the corner, and the chief of surgery, the man who arrived in rooms rather than entering them, found that he could not stop looking at the young soldier's face, at how young it was, at how close it had come to being a sheet pulled up over nothing. He found Selene the next night. She'd come in early, as always, restocking a crash cart in the alcove off the trauma bay, her back to him, her movements economical and unhurried. He stood in the doorway for a moment the way she had once stood in a doorway, watching, and he found that his mouth was dry. "Nurse Cross." She didn't turn around right away. She finished settling a tray of vials, each one facing label out, and then she turned, and her face gave him nothing. Not triumph, not anger, not even the small satisfaction he'd have felt if their places were reversed. Just that flat, patient stillness, waiting to hear what he'd come to say. Dr. Vance. He'd rehearsed something in the car. It deserted him. What came out instead was plain, and because it was plain, it was the first true thing he'd said to her. "You were right, I was wrong. He'd be gone if you'd listened to me." Vance swallowed. "I've been a surgeon for 30 years, and I have never seen anyone do what you did in that bay. I didn't know it could be done outside a..." He stopped because he didn't have the word. "Outside of where you learned it." "A forward surgical team," Selene said quietly. "That's where I learned it. They told me about the medal." He said it carefully, the way you handle something that isn't yours. "Ortiz did. I didn't ask. She wanted somebody in charge to know what they'd had cleaning up their messes for 3 years." A ghost of something crossed his face, something that on a lesser man might have been shame, and on him was closer to grief. "Why didn't you tell anyone? You could have, my God, you could have been running a trauma service. You could have had my job." For the first time, something moved in Selene's eyes, not anger, memory. "I did that math already," she said. "The math of how many I could save if I ran the whole thing. I did that math for a long time, every night, over there. Too many of them and only one of me, and every time I did the math it told me the same thing, that I had to be faster, that I had to be steadier, that if I let myself feel any of it, even one of them, I'd stop being able to save the next one." She set down the last vial. "You want to know why I put it away, doctor? Because I got very, very good at it. And a person who is very good at not feeling anything while she holds a dying boy together is not a whole person. I came home to try to be a whole person. I took the quiet job. I stocked the carts. I held the hands I was allowed to hold slowly, and it was working. A small, tired breath, until your patient came through that door." Vance was quiet for a moment. Then he said the thing he had never said to anyone in his life, the thing his father's voice had taught him could never be said. "I've spent 30 years being afraid of being ordinary," he said. "I made certainty into a virtue because the alternative was admitting I could be small. And last night, I stood against a wall and watched a woman I'd called just the charge nurse do the most extraordinary thing I've ever witnessed, and I finally understood. I've had it backwards my whole career. I thought the loudest, surest voice in the room was the one that mattered. He looked at her, and there was something almost pleading in it, the ordinary boy finally showing. "It's not, is it?" "No," Selene said, not unkindly. "It isn't." She might have left it there, but she was. Underneath everything she had folded away, a generous person, and she saw the terror in him the way she'd once seen the bleeders no one else could find. So she gave him the rest of it, plain. "You want to know who mattered last night," she said. "It wasn't me. It was the paramedics who bagged him for 11 minutes without stopping. It was Ortiz on that suction, who's cleaned more blood off more floors than either of us will ever see, and never once flinched. It was Priya, who's been a nurse for 6 weeks, and held pressure on that man's leg the whole time, with tears running down her face, and never let go. I opened his chest, doctor, but I couldn't have done one thing in there if a dozen people whose names you don't know hadn't been holding the whole rest of him together while I did." She rolled her sleeves down, slow, over the scar. "The backbone is never the loudest part of the body. It's just the part that holds everything else up. Nobody ever thanks their spine. They just fall down without it." Sergeant Kane woke up 2 days later. He was confused at first, the way they all are, swimming up out of the sedation into a room full of soft beeping and gray winter light. He couldn't speak around the tube for the first day, and when they finally took it out, his voice was a ruined whisper. And the first thing he asked, the very first thing, was what had happened. Because the last thing he remembered was a street corner and a cold he couldn't explain, and then nothing at all. It was Ortiz who told him, because Selene had asked her to. Selene was not in the room. She was 3 floors down, restocking a crash cart, because that was the work in front of her, and the work in front of her was the thing she did. "You were gone, Sergeant," Ortiz told the young ranger, plainly, because he was a man who'd earned plain talk. "Down here in the trauma bay, your heart stopped and they called it, and a nurse opened up your chest right there in the bay and got your heart going again with her own hand. Held your aorta closed and squeezed your heart until it remembered how, and then she walked you up to surgery herself and gave the report and went back to work like it was nothing. Ortiz's throat worked. You got shot on the wrong corner of the wrong city, son. And the one person in the whole building who could bring you back happened to be standing in the doorway. That's not luck. I don't know what that is, but it isn't luck." Kane was quiet for a long time. He'd been in places where men prayed over odds like that. Finally, he rasped, "What's her name?" "Cross," Ortiz said. "Selene Cross. She was a field surgeon before. A forward team, one of the ones they tell the stories about." A small, fierce smile. "Turns out the stories were real." "I want to see her," Kane whispered. It took 2 more days before Selene could be persuaded, and even then, it wasn't persuasion so much as ambush. Ortiz simply told her the sergeant in bed 4 was refusing his physical therapy until he'd said his piece, and that she was holding up his recovery by being stubborn, which was a thing Selene could not abide. So she went up. She stood in his doorway the way she stood in all doorways, half in and half out, ready to be needed elsewhere. The young man in the bed looked at her for a long moment. He was pale still and thin, and there was a scar on his chest, under the gown, that would be there for the rest of a life he hadn't been supposed to have. And he had spent 3 tours downrange, in the kind of places she'd flown into and out of, and he knew things about her by the way she stood before either of them said a word. "You're her," he said. His whisper had gotten stronger. "You're the one. I was on shift," Selene said. "That's all. Ortiz told me what you did." His eyes were wet, and he was too much a soldier to be ashamed of it. "She told me you were downrange, forward team." He tried to sit up and couldn't quite, and she crossed the room without thinking and eased him back, and her hands on him were sure and gentle, and he felt the difference in them. The thing Dr. Feld had felt, the thing Ortiz had recognized. "How many?" he asked. "How many did you put back together over there? Guys like me?" And Selene Cross, who never told anyone anything, looked at the young man she had reached inside of, and held, and something in her that had been closed for 3 years opened just a crack. "More than I could count," she said quietly. "And I lost some too. I lost some I still see when I close my eyes." She sat on the edge of his bed, which she never did, which was against every rule she kept. "I told myself I was done. I came here to be quiet, to be nobody. And then they wheeled you in with that regiment on your arm, and I looked at your face and I thought, not this one, not one more of ours on my watch. So I rolled my sleeves up, a breath. I'm glad I did, Sergeant. That's not a thing I've let myself say in a long time. I'm glad I did." Kane reached out with a hand that still had a line taped into the back of it, and he found her wrist, and he did the thing that soldiers do, that means more than any medal, more than any word. He held on, just held on, the way she'd held on to him when his heart forgot how to beat. "Somebody had to," he whispered. "That night, over there, and this one, somebody had to." "Yeah," Selene said, and for the first time in 3 years, her eyes stung. "We usually do." The story didn't stay in the hospital. Stories like that never do. Someone told someone, and a reporter came asking, and Selene said no to the reporter as flatly as she'd said no to a called code, because she had not done any of it to be seen. But the hospital saw her now, and there is no unseeing a thing like that. They offered her things, a trauma nurse specialist role, a teaching position, training the residents in the field, techniques most of them would never otherwise learn. The ugly, beautiful battlefield medicine that had come home in the hands of a woman they'd walked past for 3 years. Vance himself put his name behind it, which cost him something, standing up in front of a board and telling them that the best clinician in his department was a night charge nurse he had personally dismissed, that he had been wrong in a way that a young man had very nearly died for, and that he intended to spend what was left of his career being a smaller and better man than he'd been. The board was quiet after that. A chief of surgery does not stand up and say such things, but he did. Selene took the teaching role, in the end, though she kept some nights on the unit too, because she could not quite give up the work of being present when the trouble came, and she started, slowly, to let people know her. Not all at once, not the whole of it, but she let Priya ask her questions, and she let Ortiz sit with her in the break room in the small hours. 2 women who'd seen the same darkness from different wars, saying little, understanding much. She started to be, a piece at a time, a whole person again. It turned out the way back was not to bury the hands. It was to let them be seen, and to let the seeing be gentle. Sergeant Kane walked out of the hospital 6 weeks later, on his own feet, with his family around him and a scar on his chest, and a debt he'd carry lightly, the way soldiers carry such debts. He stopped at the nurse's station on his way out. Selene wasn't there. She was in the trauma bay, of course, because there was trouble coming and she'd known it before it came. But he left something for her. A folded square of cloth, a regimental patch, the same emblem that had been inked on his arm, the thing that had made her look at his face and decide. There was a note pinned to it in the careful hand of a man not used to writing his feelings down. For the one who rolled her sleeves up. "You saw me before you knew me. Some of us never get thanked. Consider yourself thanked. Airborne." Selene found it at the end of her shift, in the gray hour before dawn, with the wind still throwing itself against the frozen doors of the ambulance bay. She stood a long moment holding the patch in her palm, the way she'd held so many things that mattered. And then she did something she had not done in 3 years. She put it in her pocket, over her heart, and she left it there. Selene Cross rolled her sleeves down over the scar on her forearm, and she went home in the snow. And she was, for the first time in a very long time, not hiding. These stories are made with love, and this one was made for everyone who does the holding and never hears the thanks. If Selene stayed with you tonight, subscribe, and I'll keep telling them. That is all I ask.